This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it. Guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to a special episode of the Film Stories podcast.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew, as always. That's absolutely all you need to know about me. In terms of this podcast, though, well, we're here to talk, as the title suggests, of the stories of film. That I tend to talk about production stories, development stories, behind-the-scenes stories. Do you know what? Occasionally I have a guest on who takes me behind the scenes of their film and talks about the making of it a little bit as well. It's almost as if I've set up that preamble for a reason. Now, the films I tend to choose for this podcast tend to have a mainstream leaning. They tend to be films I'm generally quite interested in. And that's certainly the case in the focus of this special episode of the podcast, where I'm going to focus on the film Jumanji: The Next Level. This is the follow-up to Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle, which I found an absolute delight and a real surprise out of nowhere. Both films were directed by Jake Kasdan, and Kasdan is joining me as a special guest on this episode of the podcast, and we talk about both of those movies and go a little bit behind the scenes of what it was like to go through the release of the first and then the making of the second. The way it's going to work, very, very simple. I'm going to play you a clip from the new film, which is in cinemas from today. That is the 11th of December 2019, which is the day this podcast is released. Once that clip's done, you're going to be magically transported to my conversation with Mr. Kasdan. Without further ado, here's the clip.
Welcome to Jumanji. This next venture is even more challenging. Now remember, the future of Jumanji is in your hands.
I have one important question. Who is Jumanji?
Is that Barbara's boy?
We're gonna die.
We did die.
Are we in hell?
I knew it.
Oh my god.
This is a whole new thing.
You got to have eyes in the back of your head.
What in the Sam Hill?
That was a clip from Jumanji: The Next Level. Jumanji: The Next Level. Is there a colon?
There's a colon.
There is a colon.
Yeah,
Jumanji:
absolutely.
The Next Level. I'm delighted to be joined by its director and co-writer, Jake Kasdan. Hello.
Hey.
Can I start, with all due respect, with the last film?
Sure.
Welcome to the Jungle, because I was working for another website at the time, and nobody quite saw that coming. In the nicest sense, that was supposed to be the Christmas of Pitch Perfect 3, and that was supposed to be the Christmas of Star Wars The Last Jedi. I was talking to my local cinema manager, my local multiplex manager, and he was talking about how they were allocating the screens for the films, and Jumanji was third. The space was going to the... When did you know? When did you know just what impact it was having, and when did you know that the audience was turning very much in its favour? Because I mean, genuinely, it's great. It's my kid's favourite film.
Thank you. I was as surprised as anybody, I guess, is the answer. I mean, I loved the movie, and I was excited about what we were putting out there, and I knew that I had seen it with audiences, and that we had. I felt like it was a good time, and I was. In other words, it wasn't a reflection on the movie, but I just didn't anticipate that it would. Honestly, I wasn't thinking about that aspect of it that much. There were moments where I thought, this could maybe connect with a big audience, but I didn't really anticipate that at all.
Because what was unusual in the UK, I'm not quite sure how it reflected in the US, is the slow burn of it. That we're in an era, obviously, I don't have to explain this to you, but of big movies coming, having their opening weekend and disappearing. But I know it was The Greatest Showman that got a lot of the press around the same time as well. But Jumanji over here was playing for months.
Yeah.
And months.
Yeah.
And did you get a sense of that it was sustaining? That
well, that was what was the sort of thrilling thing, was it just stuck around,
yeah.
you know, and it was a function of the release date and the fact that it was the holidays and there was room for families to, you know, see a couple of movies and all of that, you know.
But when did you know? Because again, in the build up to that film, that, you know, believe the internet, and that wasn't going to be a good film.
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
I mean, you were living through a degree of hostility in the build up to that. But when did you know you had it? When did you know it worked? Because it was. I've reported on films for about 10, 15 years. It's one of the most remarkable 180s I've seen in terms of.
It was a crazy thing. Yeah. When did we know that it was?
Yeah, when in your heart did you know that it was going to work?
Well, in my heart, I knew that the movie worked.
Yeah.
That is different from the box office.
Of course,
you know? I knew early on that there was an idea that I had responded to really powerfully in the script.
Yeah.
That I had sort of run at the chance to make that movie. I knew that I had found the most perfect possible cast for that idea.
Yes.
And that only I could know that in the run up to the movie coming out. You know, I mean, those of us working on the movie knew that in the run up to the movie coming out in a way that the internet couldn't anticipate, because they didn't really know what the idea was exactly.
That doesn't usually stop the internet, though, does it?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But it was. I knew as that was going on that, you know, there was a little bit of a hill to climb with the audience. I think not inappropriately. You know, I wasn't sitting there going like, "Damn them! How could they?" You know, I thought like this is sort of reasonable.
Yeah.
There are plenty of internet sort of brouhahas that I would be less charitable with, but that particular one, I thought, like, I understand why people aren't particularly dying for a sequel to Jumanji. They love the first one. They don't know what we're doing yet, so it doesn't seem like a good idea. It makes them uncomfortable. I just happen to know that what we were actually doing was pretty cool, and that we had the ideal group of people assembled to do it, and that when people finally saw what it was, at least some people would really connect to it. That I did know, and I knew I knew that the whole time. But what I didn't know was, you know, that it would connect at that level and stick around like that, and that we would have that kind of you know, if you've done this for a while, you just don't have any, you know, all the different ways that these things can go when they're released.
The insanity of
exactly.
And
I was well positioned to know exactly how rare and extraordinary what happened was.
So where are you on the big question in movies? In Die Hard, do we need to know if how John McClane became a cop?
You mean
because one of the earliest reports I read, there is a relevance to the question. I'm not going completely bonkers, but there was a prequel option you could have gone here. There was an origin story when you come to the next level, and you resisted it, and in fact you've resisted it quite spectacularly in the other direction.
Yeah.
But cliche would suggest, you're going to do the origin next.
You know, it's hard to... I have no idea what would come next, if I'm being completely honest. It's one at a time to me. But if there was a really exciting idea about that, then maybe. But I don't find it to be... in and of itself... reason to make a movie.
Again, that doesn't necessarily...
It's not what I connect to about this. I would put it that way. To me, the game is a device to tell a certain kind of story about the people about the characters. It's I've always felt like these are, at their heart, a character comedy. They're extremely elaborate character comedies with a huge component of big action and adventure, and I take all of those parts of it equally seriously, and in some ways the spectacle of it and the adventure and action part of it is much more demanding because it's more complicated. It's more physically complicated. But none of it, to me, what the basis of all of it is what's happening with the people.
I think the low budget next way to go is a ZX Spectrum version. I don't know if you're familiar with the classic British computer. Do you have Commodore 64s?
Oh, right.
Yeah, ZX Spectrums with rubber keys and stuff like that. That's the way I would take it. One of the things I think you talked about getting the key component cast together. I wonder if you can talk about the key component writers, because here... with the first film, with this one as well, I remember writing at the time about this feels really well written. This doesn't feel like people have turned up on a set and worked it out on the set. This feels like the jokes work. It feels like the interaction works. It feels like the things on page 12 are having some kind of impact on page 81 or something. From my outside looking in, can you talk about that process? Because you clearly got a strong screenplay in here, and you're a credited co-writer on this one, although I'd imagine you're a heavy contributor on the one before. But can you talk about the process of writing it, of capturing it and making sure it's in place before you unpack the camera?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think of myself as a writer first, and that is always where I'm coming from. And I can't start making the movie without feeling like the script is really kind of working, and I rely on the script. And I rely on it for everything that I do with the actors and for everything that we do with the action. The action elements of it there's a sort of additional writing phase to that's not actually in the script in terms of how you previs and lay out the sequences. There's a narrative kind of writing component to that as well, but it's essential to me that the script is buckled down. The first movie was the idea came from Chris McKenna. He is the guy who came up with this conceit as a way of reinvigorating Jumanji. He wrote it and he initially wrote it with his partner Eric Summers. A couple of other people worked on it as well, including Jeff Pinkner and Scott Rosenberg, who wrote the draft that I read, that had picked up where and elaborated on what Chris and Eric had done. When I came onto that movie, I did do some writing on that movie. And I think that and then after I did that, I then actually went back and worked with Jeff and Scott again. So it was an unusual thing where I took their draft, I sort of did a pass myself, and then I brought them back because I liked so much of what they had done and felt like we could work well together. So I had worked closely with Jeff and Scott on the last movie, as well as some other people who I had worked with in other places who would come and help in various ways and pitch ideas or, jokes. Then this time, as we were getting back into it, the sort of the way that the last one ended, although I had ended up working with a lot of different people on it, including Lee Eisenberg and Gene Stupnitsky wrote Bad Teacher, which is a movie that I wrote, that I directed, they wrote. They just did Good Boys, and those are guys I work with a lot. They've contributed here a little bit, jokes. But the natural sort of way to get into this was that I would sort of lead the writing of this movie, and Jeff and Scott, laid out this story with me, and we wrote it together.
The thing that really impresses me about the two films is that you've captured something so small in the middle of something so big. And I wonder if you can just get to that, because one of the things I took from this, there was an animated film that Paramount put out over here a couple of years ago called Capture the Flag, which isn't a particularly grand film, but it captures a relationship between a grandchild, for instance, and a grandparent in a way that I rarely see done. I know Up sort of did it a little bit, but to see that direct relationship explored on screen. And so you latch on to these really tiny little things that make far more substantive difference. And how do you find them? How do you know what is your process for finding the small things and then retaining that sense of small in the middle of something big? That's my answer question, I think.
To me, that is right at the essence of what I love about these, and that it just speaks very directly to my imagination, and I think kind of my childhood. The things that would get me excited as a kid watching movies. It's all about exactly the dichotomy that you're talking about. Yeah. And to me, what makes the strength of these has to do with taking things that are very real and human and small, and exploring them in the context of this massive landscape and kind of epic adventure context. That's where a lot of what's funny about it generates, and that's where the kind of emotional core of the movies thrive. Both movies, I think. There was a funny moment when we were just starting to shoot. We did the real world part of it before we did the adventure part of it this time. And I was shooting with Alex Wolff and Danny DeVito in this their set for the bedroom, which is on a soundstage. And it happened just because of the way our spaces were allocated that this bedroom set, which is about the size of, not quite the size of this hotel room.
It's a nice hotel
room. It's an excellent hotel room. The bedroom set was sitting in this massive soundstage on one side, and on the other side was the set for the Oasis, the village that they come to in the middle of the desert, which we built entirely practically. So it was like a whole town, right, on an interior soundstage that we could shoot nighttime during the day, with a bar, the mystical tree that they go to see, the place where he gets in the fight, the stable for the camp. This is by far the biggest set I have ever been involved in, and maybe will ever be involved in. This huge, absolutely immaculately designed, desert waste station on a soundstage.
And then on the other side,
side is this little bedroom, and you could look out the bedroom window and see the Oasis over there. And I just thought, this is kind of the perfect metaphor for what I love about these movies, which is it starts as small as it can. It starts with somebody in their bedroom, and it ends up there, and then comes back to this.
I mean, without going spoilery either, it ends as small as it can as well.
That's right.
Both of them do.
Both of them do.
I should alert you, if you'd have made this film 20 years ago, it would have been banned in Britain.
Yeah.
There was you remember the film A Very Brady Sequel? Hugely underrated comedy sequel. It was banned in Britain for a while for use of nunchucks.
You couldn't use nunchucks? You couldn't use
nunchucks. The British Board of Film Classification would have banned this for use of nunchucks.
On earth?
It came in off the back of... This is a segue, sorry. It came in off the back of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I think. The BBFC over here thought that people would emulate nunchucks. So you're a sign of evolving times as
funny.
well. I thought I should let you know that.
Progress, yeah.
I think so. You've made, you've made such a range of films and television shows, and I run a magazine, and I'm getting a pitch every month about Walk Hard and about Zero Effect from someone.
Really?
Knows. Yeah,
That's
especially
cool.
Walk Hard. And you've been through various different box office levels. You've been different kind of releases. Do you get the sense that your work is sustaining? Do you feel that love for those earlier films still? Because particularly Zero Effect over here, I mean, it just came and went.
Yeah.
I think I had to import the DVD
barely,
just to see
yeah.
it. But I mean, there's a legacy there 20 years on. I'm just
That's
curious
great.
what that feels like.
I mean, it's if that's the case, that's fantastic. And it's what when you have a movie that barely comes out like that, and I've had a couple of them. Your dream is that someday some people will discover they'll find it someday, and I hope that's true with Zero Effect. I love that movie. It was my first movie. Really, I loved it as much as you could. And then with Walk Hard, it's had this unusual kind of great life that I would not have anticipated when it came out, but it's been a cool thing, and it does seem to, that one I have sort of felt in the last few years in particular, it's just people have found it a little bit, and I think maybe it's the perfect movie for people to discover later in their living room with their friends.
People are putting screenings back on in cinemas.
Are they?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, that movie was like, that was one of the great experiences I've ever had, and it was, partly because making it was so much fun. John is so brilliant and all of that, and then there was this additional dimension to it, which is that we worked on the music for like 6 months before we started, and all of those songs are mostly written by like very close friends of mine, people who are already very close friends of mine, because I'm friends with a lot of songwriters and married to one and all of that, and so that was like this real kind of family affair,
One very quick last thing then. I just read an interview, I'm not asking the sequel question, but I just read an interview with James Mangold, and he was talking about how off the bat, when Logan became such a success, he got this sliver of opportunity to pursue another project, and he chose Le Mans, that he could have, and so there's sequel options there for him as well. I'm just curious, after you direct a near $1 billion movie, are those appreciating you've got your TV work as well, but are those movie opportunities afforded to you as well? Is there a small passion project that adores I'm clearly, you won't tell me what it is, but I'm just curious if that's how it works.
For somebody who kind of keeps busy, I'm not very good at planning ahead.
Yeah.
So I never really know what's right around the corner, partly because these are consuming, and so when I'm in the middle of this is all I'm doing, and then I do have a sort of a TV thing that's also important to me, and so it's sort of take it as it comes. It's not even being coy about it. I'm just always about 6 inches. I can see about 6 inches in front of my nose. Yeah.
Huge congratulations on this film.
Thanks, man.
Thank you for your
time.
Great
talking to you about it. Thank you.
And there you have it. That was Jake Kasdan talking to me a few days ago about Jumanji, The Next Level, which is now playing in cinemas around the UK and probably around the world as well, but I've not been to each of them to check, so you'll have to do the heavy lifting there yourself, I'm afraid. If you enjoy these podcasts, if you've enjoyed these, please do leave us a review, ideally a nice one, and subscribe at your podcast repository of choice. Because I'm an independent, I rely on your word of mouth to keep going, really. lovely, and I'm hugely grateful for all the support that I've had. You can find me on Twitter at Simon Brew. You can find the entire Film Stories podcast and project at Film Stories Pod. There's a whole bunch of video film stories at youtube.com/film stories, and we're on Facebook as well at facebook.com/film stories online. I nearly forgot as well. We do print magazines. The latest issue of Film Stories magazine, that's available to order now at www.filmstories.co.uk. All done. I'm going to go off and put together the next regular episode of the Film Stories podcast that will be with you next week. That's going to be another festive one. Until then, thanks as always for listening. Thanks for your support, and I'll be back with you soon with another bunch of film stories. You take care. Bye-bye.